Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health.
Good morning. I'm Ann Schindler, and this is First Coast Connect. Today, they leave the local news scene with more than 50 years of combined experience and a unique perspective on the changing media landscape. We welcome veteran journalists Jim Piggott and John Bachman. Later, a nonprofit leader shares how her experience with homelessness led her to advocate for feeding the hungry. But first, at a time of turbulence and transformation in local media, we're talking to two industry vets about how things have changed in the years since they began. To discuss it, we're joined by the recently retired Jim Piggott, longtime City Hall reporter at News4Jax.
And it's great to be here, Ann. Thank you.
It's great to have you, Jim. Also, John Bachman, who signed off the anchor desk at Action News Jax last Wednesday. Welcome, John.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
Great to have you. So, how does it feel?
It's a little strange, to be honest, but it's fantastic.
Yeah.
And I'll defer to Jim because he's been doing it longer than I have. But I'll tell you what, being able to wake up and then go about your day and not have to get ready to get ready is what my wife always called it, because I go in the afternoons usually. And so I spent the whole day getting ready to get ready. I don't have to do that anymore.
And you did newscasts at 5, 5:30, 6, and 11? 6
Yes.
and 10? And...
I did them all at one point. We launched the 4 o'clock newscast. I did that for a while, along with the 5 to 6. Then we had the 6:30 as well. Then we have the 10 and the 11 over with Fox and CBS.
So you're never off.
It was a fair amount,
Yeah.
but no, we had breaks and stuff. It was okay.
I mean, like off in terms of
No, you're
not
never
having-
off.
Yeah.
Right. You wake up in the morning, you check your phone, you stay in touch with different newsmakers. You're doing all the things you're doing while you're maybe mowing the grass in the morning or whatever. And then and then you get ready to get ready, as my wife likes to say.
Jim, how long has it been since you stepped off? A month?
It's been 1 month. July 1st was the first, the day one. John, what you were just saying, you were never off. You were always on. And that's the weird part this whole month has been, because I'm going, so much has happened this month with the assassination attempt, Biden making his announcement. I go, oh, got to be. And I can sit back and watch it and just thinking, I really want to be asking questions. So that's what's been the interesting thing about this month of being retired. But a lot has happened, too. You traveled. I mentioned to you, my partner has moved in. I have a Great Dane now and getting ready to do more. So it's interesting. Life goes on, but I miss news.
You do. You miss it. So
I do miss news.
when
yes.
it's breaking, you're not like, oh, thank goodness I don't have to be in the
kind of
newsroom.
going, I don't have to get that call. I'm not on call or have to do that. But I miss the immediacy of it. I miss wanting to know or get to the bottom of something, like watching the mayor's budget address this past month. I'm going, oh, I have so many questions about that. Different things like that.
I think, curiosity is what makes a really good reporter. And that's just a natural, ingrained trait. And hopefully you never lose that.
Hopefully.
So I think what Jim's getting at, and certainly something you never want to lose.
Right.
And it makes you what you are.
I wanted to note that one of our colleagues, David Bauerlein, sort of addressed that about you, Jim, when you announced that you were leaving. He tweeted that he knew what a relentless journalist you were, always working at City Hall on the City Hall beat. But he said, quote, I can't count how many times the quote that got used from a press conference was the one that was in response to Jim's question. And it's so true. I've covered stories with you and I'll ask questions, but the soundbite, that really good soundbite is almost always a Jim Piggott question.
I think I learned that from my dad. It's always ask, what does the person next to you want to know? The person at home, what's the one thing they want to know? And I would ask that, how does this affect everyone?
I've got a little clip of a couple of moments from your reporting history, Jim. Let's take a listen.
Deb, right behind me where this fence is, this is one of those toxic ash sites. There's 4 of them around the city. It's clearly fenced off. People can't get in here. But I want to show you the real problem.
Corrine, you're a convicted felon. Should you run for office?
Is there anything that you do want to say at all, Aaron? I know you're getting a hug from your family, but this is important. Obviously, you're going to appeal, but what do you think? I'm sorry, I do have to ask. You don't have anything to say at all?
So that last one, of course, was Aaron Zahn, the former CEO of JEA. He's actually going to be sentenced in his criminal case this afternoon. Before that, Corrine Brown, who was a congresswoman who was also prosecuted and convicted, although her conviction was later overturned. But those are big cases and big stories that you followed from the jump.
From the start on that, and that's what I'm talking about. I'm going to miss things like that. We were talking before the show today with Aaron Zahn being sentenced today. I feel I got to go.
Yeah,
just
yeah.
just to see how this plays out, to see at least where this part of this ends right now, and that's something I think that's so important with local journalism is that I think people have to be enthusiastic about covering the news.
Yeah, and that says a lot because for people who don't know Jim Piggott, his beat is on the street. His beat is at City Hall. He does not love sitting in court like some of us
Right,
do.
right.
So for him to voluntarily on his free time go to see the sentencing really does speak to just kind of your commitment and your passion.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Um, so interestingly, you both came into news. You mentioned your dad. Your dad also was in broadcast for 40 years or something.
He retired from Des Moines
Yeah.
as the main anchor after years and years and years. Yeah.
So how did his role play into your decision to join news ultimately?
Well, I always like to say I grew up in the newsroom, right? So I grew up in the chaos, the cussing and the mayhem that is a newsroom, at least was a newsroom. And as a kid, you're like, this is the greatest. These adults are acting like lunatics because something crazy is happening and they have 30 seconds to figure out what to say. And then the light comes on and, oh my gosh, it was thrilling. So I grew up in the back of my mind, always thinking that was great. I also grew up with the same name as my dad. And so early on, I was like, I don't want to do that because that's what my dad does. And I grew up being, John Bachman's kid.
Yeah.
And so I actually went to college to be a doctor. I mean, I took pre-med classes. I even took the MCAT test to go to medical school. I didn't study for it.
Okay.
And that was a telltale sign to me that maybe I wasn't ready to dedicate my life to that. I took the test. I did surprisingly well for not studying.
Yeah, right.
I did surprisingly well, but not nearly as well as I expected to, nor should have done, and certainly wouldn't have gotten into the schools that I wanted to go and was expecting to go. So at some point I was like, this is okay. So that's when I decided to look at this as an option, and I was given an opportunity to sort of test it out, and I was an intern in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and that's when I knew this is what I needed to do.
And I understand that your early screen test or your first appearance, you kind of were like a long hair, not
yeah.
maybe the clean
Oh,
cut.
you got some good sources, Ann. Yes, I was a college student. There was a guy that my dad stationed in Des Moines who said, I'm trying to start this teenage sports education show that meets the requirements of the federal government, and we've tested all these professional hosts. None of them test well with the kids. Do you think your son would do it? And my dad's like, probably not, but I'll ask him. And sure enough, I was like, I'll give it a shot. I came home for like Thanksgiving or something, and I had the mop head look of a college kid, right? Back in the early 90s, the kind of the grunge look, and it tested great. So they hired me. They didn't hire me. They said, "Here, we'll fly you to Chicago. Go shoot this thing at Wrigley Field." And I was on Wrigley Field playing catch with Turk Wendell. I met Harry Carey, and it was just like a thrill. And I was like, "This is kind of cool. You get to do some things you don't normally get to do." I already knew I loved the chaos of it. I enjoyed telling a story, and as I mentioned, I was just naturally curious, and it was just an easy fit. It was certainly didn't start out doing it for the money. I think my first job out of college, here my parents thought they were raising a doctor, and I get my first job out of college and I'm making $18,000 living in what my future wife liked to refer to as the shanty.
The shanty.
In Rapid City, South Dakota.
So I will say the early part of your career, it almost sounds like something from the Stone Age now. So I'll just, what I know of it, you're the bureau chief in Rapid City for a station in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. You're alone. You're shooting on 3/4-inch video cassette.
Yes, for those who don't know, that's like using bricks.
Yeah, but not only are you shooting on this ancient medium, but you then have to take the video. You have to drive it to the airport.
Yeah.
Put it on a plane from Rapid City to Sioux Falls so it could make the 10 p.m. newscast.
This was pre 9/11, so I could drive up to the curb of the Rapid City. I think it was an international airport. Maybe it was just regional, whatever it was. The Rapid City Airport, the Northwest Airlines ticket counter before they merged with Delta, and I would park the Kello TV station wagon right there at the curb, walk in or run usually, carrying my tape. And more than once, I probably shouldn't say this, but more than once, those lovely ticketing agents would radio back and hold the plane for a minute, because it was a little commuter like puddle jumper from Rapid City to Sioux Falls.
Wow.
But I would put the tape. I would give the tape to them. They would run it out to the plane.
They're like Bachman's on deadline.
Yes. I mean, I did it for a year and a half. So after, a few months, they figured this out. And so they would run back to the plane, put the tape on the plane, wherever they would put it, fly it to Sioux Falls, and then a courier would pick it up at the airport and drive it to the station in Sioux Falls, and they would put it on TV for the 10 o'clock newscast in Central Time Zone. And then in Rapid, where I was, it was 9. And that's how we would do it 5 days a week.
It's unbelievable.
It was crazy. It was crazy.
No satellite then. You couldn't feed it satellite.
Well, it's funny. They had satellite, but they didn't want to pay, they didn't want to pay to install it or all that. But they also had, towards the end, in fact, the person who replaced me had it, I'll call it easier, but missed out on some pretty fun opportunities. I mean, I'll never forget those stories of running, and I mean, my friends at the airport. I mean, I wouldn't trade it for the world.
It's like the movie broadcast news when they're running down the aisle with
Yes.
the tape to get that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'll miss some of that, but yeah, they eventually installed like fiber optic line where they could then, feed it back directly. So, it all changed shortly after I moved to the big city of Sioux Falls.
And then somebody invented the internet, right?
Yes, exactly.
If you're just joining us, I'm talking to veteran reporter Jim Piggott, recently retired anchor John Bachman. We're talking about their years here in local media, and you are welcome to join us with your calls or questions or just to say hello. They're at 904-549-2937, or you can email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. We've got a call from Eric. Good morning. Welcome, Eric.
Good morning. A comment and a question. Some local news broadcasts are so sloppy that they're a little bit hard to watch. For instance, one time I was watching, this was a couple of years ago, they were doing a report about how San Marco floods sometimes. Now, San Marco was built on the dredgings of the St. Johns River and is just naturally low. It's got a lower elevation. That's why it floods. But anyway, they sent this reporter out there, and he's showing garbage in the little ditches, and he's saying that the reason San Marco floods is because these little ditches aren't cleaned out, which was preposterous. This was a situation where the reporter heard something, so he called the city. Somebody from the city told him this, and then instead of finding out if that was actually true or not, he just reported it. The question I had was real quick. The conflict of interest between advertisers and telling the truth and stories, who is there an actual person that says, listen, we can't tell this story because this person advertises with us, or we shouldn't, or whatever? Is there a person that is in charge of that? Thanks for taking my call.
Thanks, Eric. Either of you want to tackle that?
A couple of things. I wonder if that was the story. I've done so many flooding stories in San Marco, and I know exactly what Eric is referring to on that. I mean, when you're faced with the situation, but I know for me, I used to always, maybe I would have called Public Works, but and said, what's the flooding situation here? Yes, we know the depth of San Marco and what always happens out there. A lot of times drains may have been clogged, and maybe they just didn't explain enough what had happened there that caused even more flooding. I don't know, but you're right. That needs to be checked. When it comes to a conflict of interest or whatever happens with advertisers, I've faced that situation before. Usually it's the news director, the person in charge of the newsroom, would make that decision. And, there have been times in the past where sales says, and this I'm talking years ago, would come down and say, hey, lay off that car company, lay off that, but we wouldn't. And I will say, and that's a decision that comes from the newsroom as a whole. You meet throughout the day if it's something like that. But usually, in my experience, I've seen it come that question come in, we shouldn't do this. But the pushback has always been, yes, we are going to do this. I think that's at least how it has been where I've worked, and not only at Channel 4, but at other stations, the same thing.
I agree, Jim. I mean, the conversation happens in I would hope in every newsroom, and every newsroom I've been a part of, the pushback is strong. Do you always do exactly what you set out to do. Maybe not always, but you're always the journalistic integrity is protected, at least in the newsrooms that I've been in as well. And I think that speaks volumes to what local TV is still able to do. As far as the other thing, the only thing I'll say to the other issue was, a lot of times, especially lately, you have younger, inexperienced people on the street who are still learning the trade, still learning how to do their jobs, frankly. And they're also being tasked with doing so many more things than a lot of us growing up in this business had to do.
Mm-hmm.
And that's probably, I'm not going to speak to that particular story, but in general, not only do you have younger, less experienced people doing their thing, but you also have them doing multiple stories frequently. So they might only have an hour and a half or 2 hours to tackle that one story for the day, and then they're off and running to the next story. So, that's just the reality of the business today.
The grind is serious. I mean, I
Yes.
was very
Right.
rarely in sort of the daily news mix.
No, yeah.
But when I was, and I had to kind of go in, cover that day's story, and turn, I just always felt like I needed a day off the next day.
Yeah.
It's exhausting.
I came to Jacksonville in '85, and at that time, to work in this market, you usually had to work 2 or 3 jobs before you worked in Jacksonville.
Mm-hmm.
Now I see reporters, this is their first job out of college. And it's exactly what you were talking about. They're very good at what they do,
Correct.
and they're trained, but you don't have that savvy that you need. There's a little skill involved in that, and it's not there.
Not only that, but it's not even necessarily that they're inexperienced, although that is the case. It's the inexperience within that market. So even if you'd been doing the job for, say, 20 years and you've been in Jacksonville for 2, you might not know about San Marco in all the intricacies of that. We know that because we've been here for a long time. But if you're relatively new, and Jacksonville is just one of those markets. I mean, Jim is among many actual exceptions because Jacksonville is such an awesome place to stay and live. But it is the size market where you have people coming and going fairly regularly.
We've got a call from Rick in Arlington. Good morning, Rick. Go ahead.
Yeah, good morning, and congratulations on you guys on your retirement. I just have a quick question. Jim, you was good at this, but when you're interviewing someone, right, and they say to you, no comment, why does it seem like, I'm just using this for an example, why does it seem like y'all try to force an answer out of a person who's saying, I have no comment? And again, congratulations on your retirement, and hope to see you around in Jacksonville. Thank you.
Thank you for
Good
that.
question, yeah.
Well, yeah, we do get no comment a lot, and the reason I'll keep pushing on that, because it's usually an elected official, and I think they have to comment. I'm sorry, and that's one thing I don't understand why they run from us. Why, I'm not going to talk about this at this point, and we've seen that so many times in this town. That I think it's my job, or it was my job, to get that comment because it's important to hear what they have to say. They go, oh, I just don't want to talk. Well, that's what we do. And that's what I think is also beginning to miss from this town, that people are not doing that. They accept no comment. And I'm going, no, you have to comment.
I want to ask you what your strategy is on that because, as we mentioned earlier, very often you really did get a good soundbite, but you were able to get in almost every circumstance, even people, they've been counseled by their attorney, they're coming and going from a courtroom, and they're saying no comment. And you ask a question that somehow elicits a response. How did you do that?
First off, I try not to get angry, and I don't get angry with them. I would be polite about it.
Absolutely.
I go, oh, come on. And as I just explained, I would explain to them, I said, I think you have a right to say something. I think people have a right to know this. And, that's what you were elected for. And I think that would work. Like, there's always those scenes that I know I've done it a lot. You chase people down the street, or I've chased them into elevators. Mayor Deegan, Ben Sass from UF. Yeah, because, well, it's a public place, first off. And I just think you're not going to run from me from this without saying something because people want to know. They want to hear it.
But I will say you're always very courteous, and even in those confrontations or exchanges, you were always very polite. I recall that Corinne Brown would not want to speak. She'd be getting out of her car, the former congresswoman, and she knows you so well. She would take your arm to 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 walk, to help get her into the building, and eventually she would start to talk
Well,
to
that's
you.
because, I mean, wouldn't you help somebody up the stairs? And that's even though you got a microphone, I'm going to help somebody up. I mean,
Yeah.
that's what you do. I think that's the polite thing to do.
It's it. I think what you're getting at is that there's a level of trust, right? You
Yeah.
build, you earn that trust over time, and again, that's why experience is a value, because the longer you're around, the more trust you can earn and build up. And what we do is trust. I mean, that is trust and credibility are kind of our product.
Yeah.
That's what we have.
And that trust is you're going to give both sides. You're going to give
That's
them the
right.
chance to talk. You'll hear from the other side, but you have to do both sides. Everybody says, well, there's 8 sides, but there are 2 sides, and you let them speak, and you let the other people speak.
And when you're talking about building that trust in a community, this is a time when there's a lot of skepticism about media in general, although it's all sort of lumped together, I think, in a way that's probably not very fair. Social media is lumped in with what's on YouTube, with what's on a TV station or in a newspaper. But local media in polling has always come up as much more trusted and much more reliable. It's a bipartisan agreement. People really do believe that local news is more trustworthy.
I think there are probably multiple reasons, but the one I give as the top is because we live here. We see our viewers, our readers, we see them in the grocery store, at church. We're held accountable at the soccer fields. If first of all, if I do or say something that is incorrect, I'm going to hear about it first thing from all the people that I run into. So I'm number one, I get checked on that. And then that's a motivating factor to double down on being better the next time. And I think where you run into some problems is you have, in the networks and even in some of the online forums where they're not actually away from their keyboards, they're just doing their thing. They're not out among their peers, among their readers, among their viewers. And you want to be held accountable. That's the fastest way to do it.
Yeah.
And that, to me, is why local journalism is still hanging on.
Well, and that what I think we're getting at here too is the fact of cable. When with cable news, local, we used to have to really take care in what we did. There was the fairness doctrine at one point. You had to give both sides on that because you're licensed. You're a licensed broadcaster. Cable, not that way. And I think that's where people get confused, that local news really has to tell both sides. At least it used to be that way. And I do see that, separating sometimes. Oh, well, we're this affiliate, or we use this, so we're going to. And I hate seeing that. And that to me is why local news is so important. It affects every one of us, as you were mentioning, that lives here. That story that's going on at City Hall, per se, is something that you're gonna end up paying for, and you need to know this. They're not going to tell you that, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican. This is, no matter what, this is going to affect you, and that's what I think is important.
We've got a call from Bonnie in St. Augustine. Good morning, Bonnie. Go ahead.
Hi, Ann and Jim and Bachman. I'm a PR person. I worked with you guys a long time. It's Bonnie Hayflick in St. Augustine.
Oh, hey, Bonnie.
And I
Hey,
just
Bonnie.
wanted to,
Yes.
hey, thank you for your years of investigative work. And my question is for, I guess, Ann and Jim. Who do you feel, or do you feel at all, that we have a good investigative reporter or team, either on the print or broadcast side in Jacksonville, that may not be swayed by advertisers or station policy? And then for Bachman, how did you decide to make the decision to go to the dark side, as we used to say in the old days?
Yeah.
And just to let you all know, I formally retired in June and
Congratulations.
get to stare at the
Yes.
sky.
You're going to enjoy
Get
it.
to stare at the sky, and you kind of know when you know. And I'm wondering if you all had that feeling too. I know Ann is still working journalist, but just so glad to hear your voices, and thank you for your years of great work here.
Thanks, Bonnie. Congrats on your retirement. John, do you want to talk about what prompted you to leave?
Sure. It's a long question. The short version is it was time. I'll say this. I still enjoyed some aspects of what I did. A lot of the stuff we're still talking about. I'm still naturally curious, and I still like to know what's going on and why it's happening and who's really running things and doing the things. But the business has changed, and I've been doing it for 27 years, and I won't say, it's changed, and it was time, and it was a good time to make a clean break, if you will. And I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to go anywhere, and so I started plotting a little while ago on what I could possibly do and still kind of continue doing what I've been doing a little bit differently, of course. And I've been good friends with Matt Gallner for a long time, and anytime.
And for people who don't know, Matt is
Yeah.
a former reporter at the TU, but in recent years he's been in PR and
Yes.
most recently a
At the Chamber.
spokesperson for the Chamber of Commerce.
He's been running comms for the Chamber as long as I've known him. He was there right before he started there right before I got here, and that's how we met. Was I knocked on his door one day before I'd come on TV, because back in those days that's what you did. I was new to the area, and I before I went on TV, I wanted to know the people. I went to the mayor's office, I went to the Chamber, I went to UNF's president's office. I mean, just all the different places you could go to sort of just say, hey, I'm new. Please let me know what's going on. Anyway, so Matt and I have been friends, and for the longest time we'd get together every month or two for lunch and just solve the city's problems. and then it sort of within the last few years it sort of shifted to, well, what if we did some of this stuff? And so that talk got louder and louder, and he started saying he might be ready too. And so when you can partner with a guy like Matt Gallner, you really don't turn that down. And so it was just kind of a perfect time to just say, you know what, let's try something. So that's the answer to that question. I'd like to hear your guys' answer to the other question, but go ahead.
Yeah, well, we should say, so you are moving on now to do a job that's going to be corporate communications, some political consulting,
all of the above.
Strategic planning,
corporate
crisis consulting.
At this point, we've cast a wide net, and because we don't know exactly what is going to be the most needed, frankly. But we've got we're doing all of the things you mentioned. Some media training will be involved in that. We're working to try to basically, we call it create, connect, and compel. We want to create content and strategies that connect with an organization's people, audience, and then compels them to act in some way.
And like a drug dealer, do you want to give us just a little taste of like what you might offer somebody as advice if they're going to go in front of a camera and they're not trained, or they're in a crisis situation?
Hopefully they are getting some training ahead of time so that you're ready if and when a crisis happens. And then the best advice is to be yourself and be honest. That doesn't mean you have to give the whole truth, nothing but the truth, as if you're in court, but you got to be honest, and you got to give them something. Just to Jim's point earlier, no comment is usually the sign that you don't want to be talking at all, and that's not the message you want to be
John,
giving.
I think something you said earlier before we went on the air, that what you're doing is how the whole scope of news is changing, that companies, businesses are hiring people like yourself to get that word out where local news is not needed anymore. And that, to me, is scary.
Yes. I mean, in a lot of ways, you could say what I'm doing is exactly feeding, as Bonnie said, the dark side. But I hope with some of my credibility that, there'll be some trust there that what I'm saying is true. But yes, I think the old adage, when I got into this business, I can remember the newsroom in Sioux Falls the fax machine going off, and it was a business or an agency or the mayor's office sending a press release out saying, here's what we're announcing. Maybe we have a news conference to go with it. We hope you'll cover whatever that is. But it'd come in fax to the newsroom, and then the TV station would dispatch a photographer and a reporter to go cover this, and that's how that company or agency would tell their story. Well, now newsrooms are thinly staffed and, frankly, don't have usually the manpower to go cover these things, certainly not to cover them in the way that the organization really is able to tell a thorough story. And so that is what I see as an opportunity to kind of go on the other side of the fence and say, you need some people who can tell your story and do it, on your platforms and stuff.
To Bonnie's question, Jim, in terms of investigative reporting, we've talked a little bit about how staffing is really thin. I don't think people sometimes appreciate just how thin, because you do have reporters, sometimes new young reporters who are going out, less so at your station, but certainly at other stations where they're doing it all alone. You guys usually had a photographer with you.
But not always, and at least I did. I always had a photographer. I'm old school, but the newer reporters, no, they would do that on their own. And Bonnie asked the question, what's happening in town? We've got Dave Bauerlein, fortunately, and others with the paper right now, with the Times Union. Excellent reporters, but it's, what's happening on that. You got Hannah there as well. You have the financial, the Daily Record, Karen Mathis, and doing wonderful things out there. At our station, I know Ashley Harding has taken over the beat that I'm doing, where, I would go down City Hall every single morning and just walk around, go in and read the mail, talk to everybody. Ashley's picking that up, but people stopped doing that. And that's how we used to cover news locally. We used to all go down to the police station, go through the police reports.
Morning briefings. They used to have morning briefings.
Yeah, different things like that. And that's not there. And that's what I think is scary. City Hall is like closing the doors to us as well, which is, I think, like I used to go into the city council offices. Every city council member has their own office up there. And I used to walk from office to office, talk to their aides every morning. Well, they said, nope, you can't do that anymore, because they said you could be carrying a gun because of the right to gun carry. So we can't let you go back there by yourself like you used to do, which I did for 27 years.
When did that change?
It changed like a year ago. I fought to have it changed, and we'll try to change it back. Now, Mayor Deegan, I will say, opened, those doors were closed as well when Lenny Curry was there, that we couldn't go back in the offices. Mayor Deegan opened those doors. I could go back in every office in her place and talk to people there. That does not take place. Her office does. City Council needs to open their doors. They need to be more open to reporters and to the public.
We actually got a comment about that. I'm trying to locate it here. John on Facebook, he says, ask Jim about signing the sign-in sheet on the 4th floor and how important that is to creating a public record.
Well, that was it, to show that I was there every day. I signed that every day.
I can attest to that, by the way. 'Cause every time I went down there, I always saw your name on that list.
A million times.
Yeah,
Page after
yeah.
page after page.
And it was the Times Union that really made me do that, because they did a story when that book first came out about who signed that book. I never did. And I said, I'm signing it every day from then on. It's a record to show that we were there. It's all a record to show my boss, because I would go in a couple hours early before I really had to be in to work. But that I was doing my job. But I also think it's important. Like I said, I think City Hall, you remember not long ago, they tried to close you couldn't even go up to the 4th floor.
Right.
And we fought that. And I think, and everybody goes, well, who knows what they're going to be doing? I'm going, we need to know, this is the Sunshine State. The Sunshine Law is there. Don't lock that door, and allow at least the press, if you're pressed, to go back and at least ask questions. And I know they're saying, well, anybody can be a reporter now. And that is a problem now with social media. Like, I'm a reporter. And I know that runs into some of the problems. But I think the fact that they've closed that door also closes information.
And just in terms of being there every single day, I don't think people realize what level of commitment that takes, because you're not on the clock, right? You are going there before your morning meeting. You're going there before you're really.
That's old school. I did that. You had mentioned, my dad taught me that. My brother, also in journalism, and a reporter for years taught me that. We would all we had bureaus down. This is in Indianapolis at the police department. You would go there, and that's where you would work out of. And I just think that's just commitment to the job. And I hope that new reporters today have that same commitment. Ashley Harding, like I said, is following my footsteps.
There's a lot.
She's
There are
doing that.
there are a lot of good reporters still in this town.
Scott
There
Johnson's
really are.
doing things
Yeah,
like
there
that.
really are.
Yeah,
but
there really are.
You know, it's just there aren't as many of them.
Is it staffing that was the change that most impacted your decision
And
to leave?
when I got here 10 years ago, when we were owned by Cox Enterprises sold Cox Media Group to Apollo it's been a few years now, 4 or 5 years. I've lost track. But when I came down here, we would have regularly 8 reporters and photographers, say on a Wednesday for the 9 to 6 shift, what we call the dayside shift. We'd have 2 in the morning, 2 reporters, 2 photographers for the morning show, 8, as many as 8, 9 to 5, 9 to 6, and then we'd have up to 3 reporters and photographers for the night shift. So how many is that? That's 13 reporters on the full staff days. Now, with people working weekends and whatnot, it was usually like a Wednesday when we had that.
Right.
So it might be less than that other days, but that gives you an idea. And now it's significantly less than that. Significantly less than that. We have 2 in the night. Well, no, we've only had 1 for the last however long. And I say we, Action News Jack's where I was. And then they'll have 1 or 2 in the mornings, and then they'll have, if we're lucky, 4 or 5 during the day.
And that's very lucky.
And
now you're lucky to have 3 anymore during the day.
That's right.
And John,
So
and
that
you had
gives you some
mentioned
idea.
it, and we had talked about this, that what we're seeing in local news today is a lot of national news.
Mhm.
And because they don't have the staff, it's important, yes, national news, but there's so many other local stories that are being, I think, ignored at this point. And that's what you tune into local news for, is to see what's happening there. There's so many other stories out there, but I know it's been a big, like I said, I've only been retired for a month. So many big things have happened, but there's so many local things that have happened as well that we're not hearing about.
Are there particular stories that stand out to you from your career, Jim, that were either stories that you really, really cared about that were consequential and mattered to you most, or that touched you in some way?
Well, I mean, the Times Union did so much on JEA, but from the beginning of that, I really saw the impact of that. That's something that I am really going to remember. Other stories, I look at it like overall what had happened, with the different mayors in office. When Ed Austin was mayor, and the different things that had happened that he had pushed through for the city, and then just getting to know him every morning, I think was important, and to get what he was getting out there. Mayor Hazuri, the same way, that there's just not one particular thing, but the whole aspect of what they did for the city. And then when we got to Mayor Delaney and the Better Jacksonville plan, I think that changed a lot of Jacksonville, even though a lot of it hasn't been done yet. Those kind of stories, I think, really impacted me. And the people that have been in office then and where they have gone from there. I used to talk to Susie Wiles every morning, and then to see where Susie Wiles is today with Donald Trump, it's amazing. And those kind of things are what I remember, are the people that have been involved, I guess.
And you're missing some of that work? I mean, you're missing the questions, you're missing the participation?
I'm missing, I mentioned, like when the mayor's budget just came out, there's so many questions about that, particularly, with the stadium, particularly going on with the community benefit action. There are things that I go, okay, well, you're working on this now, you presented this council, you're going to be taking this up. I want to know what's going on behind the doors there.
Yeah. We have a question. Charles is asking, how does Jim get his info? Sort of a broad question.
Well, as we mentioned, that going down and talking to people, not just the politicians or whatever, but the aides, the people involved. You get all kinds of stuff when you just go down and talk to people like with the security guards. Hey, do you know who was in here today? Or it's just that face-to-face contact that you get, and then you get people that would trust you and would tell you different things. And I hope I never made things up. I never said, oh, this is happening to get a reaction. It's just being honest, and I just think talking to people is where I got most of that information.
Asking the right questions and then listening
right.
to the answer, and doing it day in and day out is how you do that. It is earned. You do not just get stories. People, I mean, yes, occasionally there'll be somebody who texts the text line or sends the email in saying, hey, this is happening. But more often than not, you get that by being there every day, talking to the different folks who are in the know and earning their trust to the point where they say, you know what, this needs to be out there. I know the perfect person who will do it justice and do it fairly. I'm going to tell Jim or whatever.
Yeah.
And not ignoring like a phone call. You get so many phone calls into the newsroom. And a lot of times you're going, oh, there's a crazy person on here. But no, I mean, it's true. And you listen and you talk. And I'll tell you, Frank Powers he was our assignment manager, was excellent at that. Talked to everyone that called and got great stuff.
I think I'm sure you've had this experience where someone that perhaps you did a story with, 9, 10, 11, even 20 years ago will call you. It'll be the first time you've spoken to them. And since that time that you spoke to them last, and they'll say, hey, I don't know if you remember me, but I've got a story idea. And so there is something to be said for just being in a market for a long time.
It's a big deal because you also know the market. You know what's going on, and the people know you.
Yeah. I want to just briefly ask you, John, about the churn of this industry. Broadcast journalism in particular, the model has always seemed a little flawed to me in terms of moving markets, and the people who come are so often looking to move on. This is just sort of a step. And so you do have that problem of almost any broadcast market that you're in, no matter if it's a big city or a little town, has this problem where whoever is doing the daily news has almost always been there a very brief time and is about to leave.
Yeah, I mean that's the story as old as time, and frankly, I did it. And Jim, probably to some degree, I know you're in Indianapolis before here. That you're kind of the rarity, to be honest. Most people in broadcast news, especially my age, had to start in a small town or small-ish town, and cut their teeth, and then move to a medium-sized town, and then a slightly larger town, and then big town. And so, I mean, I did it. I was in a one-man band in Rapid City. I got pulled to the big city of Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Then I got a job in Raleigh, North Carolina. Then I went to Atlanta, and then Atlanta to Jacksonville to be the main anchor. That's just sort of that was standard operating procedure back in the day. And so, yes, I mean, now I've always said under the old model, you give yourself about 6 months as a new reporter to sort of figure out the market and who's who and what's what, and know how to go about your daily grind. And after that, it should be very stressful those 6 months, because you're drinking from a fire hose, but then you're good.
John Bachman, Jim Piggott, it's been so fun talking to you. Congrats on your retirement. Really appreciate you coming on and talking about it today.
Thanks so much.
Thank
for having
you.
us.
You got to bring Tom Wills next time. He'll tell us much more.
We'll be back in just a minute.
I'm Anthony Brooks. President Biden is proposing sweeping reforms to the U.S. Supreme Court, including term limits and an enforceable code of ethics. He also wants a constitutional amendment to overturn the court's ruling that U.S. presidents are immune from prosecution for official acts. We'll get reaction from historian Julian Zelizer next time on Here and Now.
Today at 1 on WJCT News 89.9.
On the next Fresh Air, one of the co-stars of the series Hacks, Paul W. Downs. He plays Jimmy, the Hollywood manager to legendary stand-up comedian Deborah Vance. Downs is also the showrunner and just received Emmy nominations for writing and for acting in the series. He already won an Emmy for writing the show's pilot. Join us
today at noon on WJCT News 89.9.
Vice President and now presumptive Democratic nominee Kamala Harris.
I took on perpetrators of all kinds. So hear me when I say, I know Donald Trump's type.
But what do voters know about her? Not just her bio, but what she actually believes, her values and principles, and how she'd act on them if she wins the presidency. That's on the next On Point.
Today at 11 on WJCT News 89.9.
Celebrated writer and civil rights activist James Baldwin would have turned 100 this week.
There is scarcely any hope for the American dream because the people who are denied participation in it by their very presence will wreck it.
We explore James Baldwin's life and legacy next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
And we're back. A new essential guidebook to the ancient city includes stops for grilled cheese, skee ball, and craft beer. Here to explain is Amy Angelilli, author of 100 Things to Do in St. Augustine Before You Die.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So who is this book for? Is it for tourists or for locals?
Oh, it's for everybody. The locals are buying it and checking off all the things they've already done and then making a plan to attack the things they haven't yet, experienced.
So, in fact, a lot of tourists in St. Augustine are locals, right? They're from Florida. They're from
Right.
places like Jacksonville even.
Mhm.
So there's some places we all know, right? You're supposed to go to the fort when you go there. A lot of
Sure.
people go to the lighthouse. There's certain stops that are familiar. But you moved here in 2015?
Yes, I did.
Yeah. And so were those kind of the places you also hit naturally first?
I'm always a seeker of the unknown. So I like to get, off the highway and go into the back roads and, go into the alleyways. When I discovered Joffrey's, a little Polish Greek restaurant off the beaten path, off an alleyway, off another alleyway, I knew I was onto something fun.
For people who want to follow your footsteps, where is Joffrey's?
Oh, Joffrey's is off of Avila Street, which is the oldest continuously operated road in the United States, which is right off of the plaza.
Okay, so
It
that's
was like
one
a little treasure hunt.
Yeah. So that's one of your best kept secrets.
Yeah.
Are there things in this book that you discovered for the first time when you were writing it, or were they all places that you'd been that you just wanted to tell people about?
Well, I moonlight at visitstaugustine.com. So I have kind of an insider knowledge of what's happening that's new. And we have so many things on that website that, are much outside things like the fort. And so it was a nice opportunity to pull some of those things that are a little bit lesser known. So in answer to your question, I knew about all these things, but I felt like some of them were more underground, experiences. Because if you're a first-time traveler to St. Augustine, there are things that you have to do. Now, I always enjoy following the Facebook groups when people ask, oh, I've been to St. Augustine 8, 9, 10 times. What's something different that I might not know about that I can check out?
And there's a lot of things in this book, but it's got that local feel because you're telling people, if you want to see just a beautiful sunset, where do you go?
Exactly.
Where do you go?
Well, I used to live right by Aunt Kate's.
Okay. And Volano Beach?
Yes, in Volano. And so I would walk over with the dog to see the sunset right next to there. And sometimes I'll still do that even though I live in town now. I'll drive over there and hang out with the people on their golf carts watching the sunset from the boat ramp. I was just doing that about 10 days ago. And you don't even have to eat at Aunt Kate's, although I highly recommend that you do.
Yeah, that's right on the intercoastal.
Right there, yeah.
Yeah. What are some of the experiences that you find most rewarding? Are they interactive experiences or things that are designed more for a solo explorer?
I think it's really easy to be on your own in St. Augustine because there's so many things that are walkable, of course, and also the locals are really friendly here. It's not like going to a big impersonal city. You get somebody chatting with you, and you'll learn all sorts of things about them and about the town. I remember visiting for the first time, and my husband at the time was working all day, and I would go out myself, and I would just chat people up in restaurants and at the shops, and I learned so many things. I didn't know a soul, but I felt like by the end of the week, I almost had laid the groundwork for the book without even realizing that I had.
Right. The city has changed a lot, I think, certainly from the when I first started working in this market. St. Johns County was tiny, St. Augustine was tiny. There's so much more tourism, so many more residents. And some people in St. Augustine are like enough already with the tourism, right? They're even rolling back a little bit of the Nights of Light. So how do they strike that balance? How do you think they strike that balance?
I don't think we figured it out yet, actually. Um, I think that the infrastructure is really hard when it comes to things like the Nights of Lights. The town wasn't created for that sort of situation.
Yeah.
It's very old, and when it celebrated its 450th anniversary a month before I moved here, that's kind of when it really blew up and became kind of a international sensation. And I had told people I was moving to kind of like a tucked away, sleepy place.
Yeah.
And within a year, it had blown up. And I know some locals even hesitate to spend time downtown during, a season like Nights of Lights.
Well, Amy Angelilli, author of 100 Things to Do in St. Augustine Before You Die. It's a fun book. It's a great read. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And that's our program. We encourage your feedback and suggestions. You can send either to First Coast Connect at wjct.org. The executive producer of First Coast Connect is David Luckin. Our show is produced by Stacey Bennett and directed by Brady Coram. Jamie Valet is our associate producer. Join us tomorrow when we discuss the sentence in the JEA criminal case with the 3 reporters who've covered it from the beginning. I'm Ann Schindler. You've been listening to First Coast Connect on WJCT News 89.
Provided in part by Baptist Health.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com.
Train commuters in the UK hear lots of announcements like this.
TransPennine Express apologises for the disruption to your journey.